Well, there are questions about the National Command Council coming from a different group, a group of lawyers, in fact, questioning the constitutionality of the President's decision to delegate executive functions to the National Coronavirus Command Council. Now, the Council comprises about 19 of the 28 cabinet ministers that we have. The lawyers have written to President Cyril Ramaphosa wanting clarity on the matter. And for more on this, I'm joined by Luqman Hassan from RHK Attorneys and also client Erin Richards. Erin, good evening. I'll start with you. What were the red flags around this National Command Council that concerned you initially?
Right. Well, yes, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to hear that the DA firstly has picked this up. I have been shouting these warning bells from the rooftops for weeks already. I think that initially what Nazira and I identified was that there seemed to be a lack of transparency from government generally. And specifically for our concern was the failure to be transparent about the way that the country is being governed. There were many concerns that were raised to Nazira and I, but no one seemed to be willing to directly combat and address the issue. So that was what underpinned the initial decision to communicate directly with the Presidency.
And Luqman, just come in here and tell us what's happening now. There have been, I understand, 2 letters between RHK Attorneys and the Presidency, and the Presidency sort of suggesting that you're splitting hairs, really, that they are entitled, as Cabinet is, to have any number of advisory bodies, any number of groups advising them, and that ultimately it is the Cabinet and the President who makes these calls.
Well, Sally, thanks for having me. Well, the letter that we wrote to the President was really to get clarification on the establishment of National Command Council. We don't know what its powers are. My clients wanted to know what powers and functions it has and what basis it was established. We got that response from the Presidency, which didn't quite answer my clients' concerns. So we've now sent a second letter to the Presidency, appealing to them, explaining to them again what the problems are with the Command Council and what's been communicated about it. And from there, we'll get a meaningful reply, we hope, and we can iron out whatever concerns we have.
You don't find it meaningful that the responses that you've received so far is that it's a coordinating body and that it was established under the Disaster Management Act, and you would imagine that during a time of crisis you absolutely need an advisory body, and it's not just cabinet members, it's also other people who've got specialist knowledge to guide you through this process. Why is that answer not acceptable?
What's concerning to my client, Sally, is that there have been inconsistent explanations as to what the Command Council does. So on the one hand, we hear that it's an advisory body, but in previous addresses we've heard that it's a decision-making body, and then we've heard that it's a body whose decisions are being ratified. So there is no absolute certainty on what that body is and what its functions are particularly. We've been told now that it's an advisory body, but there's no explanation as to why those addresses were made in the first place. So if we can get some clarity on that, then perhaps we're in a better position to assess completely what the Command Council is and what it's meant to do.
Erin, I just want to find out what's at the heart of your concern. Is it just an important sort of legal issue that needs to be clarified, or do you have concerns, as I've seen in some of the papers that you've sent out, that there's too much of a centralisation of power, that only sort of 18 or so of the cabinet ministers are part of this COVID council? Is that at the heart of your concern?
Yes, Sally, I think it's a fantastic question because there seems to be a narrative coming from government that the concerns being raised are merely academic, that they're legal, that they are superfluous and no one should bother. The problem is that it appears to us that a citizenry of 60 million people is possibly, on the information we've got, subject to the whims of 19 ministers who are exercising powers that are unchecked. Now, if that is an academic concern, then I have no explanation for that. That is far from an academic concern, and we need clarity. That's the end of the story as far as I'm concerned.
Doesn't the buck ultimately stop with the President? He has to take all of this into consideration, and ultimately he will decide if the recommendation of the Council is one that he wants to rubber stamp.
Yes, you see, but Sally, the problem with that question is that only after we issued our letter did we get this notion from government that suddenly the NCC is only advisory in nature. Up until this point, we've been told that it is taking decisions, which means that then, no, the President is, if that is the case, then the President is not the one who would be making those decisions. And interestingly, even in government's own document, in recent policy documents, they specifically say that the Command Council is the one taking decisions. So we're being told this in speeches. We are seeing it in official government documentation. And now we're being given a different narrative by the government. So if that level of communication malfunction does not raise serious red flags, then, you know, I question the value of the Constitution in its entirety, quite frankly.
But surely Parliament ultimately has oversight over this, and we have seen countless sort of parliamentary briefings. We've seen the ministers as well making public declarations about different aspects. It seems, from my perspective, that Parliament's all over this one.
No, Sally, to be frank with you, I disagree entirely. The mere fact that cabinet committees are sitting in briefings is irrelevant. The question is whether or not Parliament as a whole can effectively exercise its functions. And if you ask yourself a practical question, it would be this: how does Parliament exercise oversight over a body when it doesn't know what that body is doing or what its powers are? So no, I don't agree that Parliament is all over this one. In fact, my experience to date has been precisely the opposite.
Do you think that it's just an oversight in terms of the way it's been set up, bearing in mind that government had to move extremely quickly? Or do you think there's something else at play?
Sally, I can't comment on this at this stage. What I can say is that I find the confusing communication to be alarming, because we asked two very simple questions that could be answered in one paragraph. So I do find that alarming, but I also think it's important to note that government has had to act very expeditiously, and it's possible under those circumstances that mistakes were made. So if we are correct, there's no guarantee that it was a mistake or anything else. We need more information before we can assess that.
I just want to check, you're not part of any pro-unbanning liquor sales, pro-unbanning tobacco sales, or any other lobby group, or are you?
No, thank you very much for asking that question, and you're not the only one who's raised it. All of the advocates and all of the attorneys who are working on this are doing so completely for free. There's no funding. And this whole thing had its origins in my own inquiries, which I initiated out of my own concern. I'm a junior of 3 years seniority, so I don't wield influence. I'm not part of any secret networks. So there's no foundation to those speculations at all.
And Luqman, I just want to ask, is there a possibility as you go forward with this legal process, and I do want you to explain what the next step is legally, is there a possibility that we could find that our lockdown isn't legal?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, Sally, because it's wholly dependent on the type of response we get from government. If we get a satisfactory explanation as to how the council was established, or what its roles, or what its powers and functions are, then there may not be a need to question any further. If the simple questions that we have asked are not answered, then it leads us to more serious questions which may have to be challenged, and ultimately could, if tested in court, result in something as drastic as that, yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. That was Luqman Hassan from RHK Attorneys and their client, Erin Richards. Thank you very much for your time this evening. And I must say that we did reach out to the Presidency. They've not got back to us as yet, but we do hope to hear from them soon.